Still reeling from midterm election losses, U.S. President Barack Obama is on a high-profile visit to India, eyeing its lucrative market to create badly needed jobs in the U.S. But is this visit all about business? And how important is India to the U.S. in a region with growing global influence? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abugaida. Building stronger ties. Barack Obama visits India for the first time as U.S. president. This is a part of his 10-day Asia tour aimed at opening up foreign markets for the U.S. He's next scheduled to visit Indonesia, South Korea and Japan. His 3-day tour in India included a visit to the country's financial hub, Mumbai, and the capital, New Delhi. During his visit, he emphasized the need to relax trade and investment barriers in order to boost economic relations between the U.S. and India. He's called the relationship between the two countries as one of the indispensable partnerships of the 21st century. During a business council meeting in Mumbai, Obama announced trade deals worth more than $10 billion. He says the deals are expected to support more than 50,000 jobs in the U.S. He stressed on the role of Asia, and especially India, calling them the market of the future.
In our interconnected world, increased commerce between the United States and India can be and will be a win-win proposition for both nations. For every $1 billion in exports, thousands of jobs are supported at home. And already our exports to India have quadrupled in recent years.
Joining us now are guests from Kabul, Lawrence Korb. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense and is currently a senior fellow at the think tank, the Center for American Progress. And we have also in Manchester, Inderjeet Parmar. He's a professor of politics and author of the book Soft Power and U.S. Foreign Policy. Gentlemen, welcome both to Inside Story. Lawrence Korb, if I may start with you. Obama's visit is just a few days after the Democrats suffered a midterm election loss, and with high U.S. unemployment being blamed, in fact, as one of the big issues for the loss of the House of Representatives. So how do you read the timing of his trip to India?
Well, he's making a trip to, as you pointed out, to several countries in Asia. He's postponed these trips before because of the economic problems we had at home, plus he needed to get more involved in the election. So I don't think this was an attempt to divert attention from the election, but it certainly has worked out that way. And the fact that he's emphasizing the economic issues as opposed to the strategic issues will play well at home, where Americans are still very concerned about their economic situation.
Inderjeet Parmar, do you agree? Will Obama get the commercial boost that he needs at this point after the losses over in the U.S. in the midterms?
Well, that's the hope. Whether it'll be sufficient to actually do anything in the short term remains to be seen. They're talking about 50 to 75,000 jobs resting on the deals which are going to be made there, a number of defense deals and other business deals, but that remains to be seen. I suspect that it'll be a combination of some of the agreements reached in Asia in the next few days, as well as the very large stimulus package which is being suggested, or rather the quantitative easing suggested by the Federal Reserve in the next few months.
Okay, Lawrence, let's just look at some of the deals that's going on right now in India. We saw Obama announce trade deals worth $10 billion. Is this the major issue here?
No, the major issue between the United States and India have several major issues. First of all, we need India's help to work on a situation in Afghanistan to stabilize it. Without India's help, it's not going to be stabilized, because Pakistan is so concerned that India might have too much influence in Afghanistan that they're not willing to go after the Taliban. India is concerned that a lot of the military aid that we give to Pakistan is not focused on fighting groups like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but is there to build up weapons against India. And finally, Pakistan is very upset about the nuclear deal we gave India, and they're very concerned that China might help Pakistan to develop more weapons, which could set off an arms race, a nuclear arms race in that part of the world.
All right, Lawrence, you touch upon a lot of subjects here, which I do want to talk about throughout this program of Inside Story. But over to Inderjeet Parmar first in Manchester. How significant do you think, in your opinion, is Obama's trip to the U.S. administration?
Well, it's very significant because India is a very large economic partner and a growing one. It's also a counterbalance to the rise of China, which I think is going to be important in the longer run. It is a key actor in the fight against the Taliban as well. And I think it follows on from the fact that Pakistan has been under more critical scrutiny from Britain and the United States in the last several months because of its more ambiguous role in regard to the Taliban and other groups within Afghanistan. And I think bolstering India shows to Pakistan that there's not a one-track policy that the United States is following. And it's not just one particular kind of issue which the United States is trying to deal with in that region. There's the war on terror with the Taliban, but there's also the counterbalancing against China. And I think those are both very significant. And I think the more regional partners can be mobilized, as well as other members of NATO, more it will ease the United States' economic problems because it'll mean that they can reduce their military role and spending, which is causing such a large part of the deficits which the United States government is experiencing at the moment.
Lawrence Korb, just back to the economic front right now. Is India simply a nice fit right now for the U.S. with a weakened Europe and a rising China?
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that China and India are going to be major players. It doesn't mean Europe has diminished, but it means that Europe is another actor that has to be dealt with. And so, yes, I mean, if you're concerned about the world economic situation, you have to ensure that China and India keep expanding their economies so that, among other things, they can provide liquidity in the international system. They can provide markets for goods from both Europe and the United States. So it is very, very critical in that part of the world that the policies they pursue are correct because we're all in this together. Part of Obama's trip here after India and Indonesia is a G20 meeting in Tokyo to deal with this situation.
Inderjeet Parmar, economically, still staying with the economic front, at this point, who needs the other one more? Does the U.S. need India or does India need the U.S.?
Well, I think immediately speaking, I suspect that the United States needs India a little bit more, partly because of the political situation that Obama finds himself in. So he needs to fix something very quickly in order to try to get the American electorate back on track. I think in the longer run, you cannot ignore the size of the American market and its significance for India or for China. So it is mutually beneficial in the long run, but immediately I think it's a greater salience for the American economy and polity than it is for India at the moment.
Lawrence, I suppose to understand the present and what's going on right now, we have to just take a look at the past, really, and understand that. So would it be correct to say that the U.S. has had to change its attitude towards India?
Well, I think what the United States needs to do is that India is almost an equal power, and they have to treat them as a major power, not just part of South Asia, for example. And they have to recognize that a lot of the problems we've talked about, the economic problems, but things like climate change, for example, nuclear proliferation, Iran's nuclear program can't be solved without Indian assistance. And so I think what you're seeing now is it's almost a visit among equals rather than the United States, if you will, just visiting all the countries in the region.
Inderjeet Parmar, what relationship is India looking for out of the U.S.? Is it more of a strategic one than, I suppose you can say, commercial and just doing trade deals?
Well, I think there's a military relationship. India looks to the United States to supply quite a lot of its hardware. I think they're looking for markets as well. But I think India is also trying to become far more, as Lawrence Korb says, far more of more than a regional power too. And as a very large democracy, I think it wants recognition that it should have a kind of greater say in a wide range of issues. As Lawrence says there about climate change and so on, India is looking to see what the West and the United States in particular can offer it in regard to trying to ameliorate some of its economic policies in order to manage climate change as well. So I think it's looking for a far greater strategic role within, but I think it's looking for reassurance too that Pakistan is not going to be continued to receive so much American support, large part of which is directed towards India.
What sort of a relationship or what benefits, if we look at Indian companies wanting to move into the US, talk to us a little bit about that, Indrajit Parmar.
Right. Well, I don't think it's an issue about Indian companies wanting to move into the US. I think there's one of the most immediate issues is that there is a kind of political momentum behind protectionism in the United States. And part of that could well be that, you know, outsourcing of call centers and various other kinds of business from the United States to Bangalore and other places could well be under pressure. And I think India would be seeking to protect itself against some of that kind of movement, as well as to try to open itself up to American investment. The United States is already the largest foreign investor in India, and I think India has something like 13% of its foreign investment coming from the US. I think India wants to expand that and try to open up more opportunities for that. But in return for that, the United States will be looking for...
Foreign direct investment in India does still remain restricted to certain sectors.
Well, I think in the high-tech sectors in particular, they're quite open, but I suspect there are other areas which the United States wants to open up as well.
So, Lawrence
Korb, I think India is ready for business.
Go ahead, Indrajit.
No, I think India has kind of signalled itself as open for business and to try to use whatever leverage it has with other Western powers as well.
Lawrence Korb, where are the possibilities of India opening up for foreign direct investment?
Well, I think they are better than they were, say, a couple of years ago, because India's economy has grown so much, and the United States has given India a sweetheart nuclear deal to allow them to get, you know, peaceful uses of nuclear energy, even though they haven't signed the non-proliferation treaty. So I do think that they are, you know, more receptive, and as their economy is growing, it becomes easier for them to become more receptive. The interesting thing is that it's easy for people in the United States to blame foreign countries for our economic mess, and that's part of, you know, what President Obama is trying to dispel. You know, we're blaming China, we're blaming India for problems that were pretty much of our own creation.
All right, well, the relationship, gentlemen, between the U.S. and India almost seems like a work in progress for about a decade now. And in 2000, Bill Clinton, the U.S. president then, became the first American president, in fact, to visit India in over 20 years, thawing a stalled relationship. The next man in office, George W. Bush, further boosted the bond by signing an agreement to cooperate on civilian nuclear projects. This effectively legitimized India as a nuclear power. And now Obama, as we mentioned before, is attempting to forge stronger economic ties. Lawrence Korb, if I may come back to you. So is this, can you say, a new leaf? Is it a turning point for India-U.S. relations?
Well, I think the turning point was Clinton's visit, because that was really when the United States was at the height of its power. I mean, this is when people were talking about the unipolar moment. The United States fiscal house was in order. We had unrivaled military power. And the fact that Clinton went there, I think, sent a signal that, you know, India was going to be treated with respect. And then, of course, as you mentioned, George W. Bush gave him a very good nuclear deal. And then, of course, Obama going now. Comparatively early in his presidency, I think psychologically has been very, very important to the Indians.
Inderjeet Parmar, let me ask you, a senior Obama aide has described this particular visit as a full embrace of India's rise. So we touched upon this a little bit, but now let's just get into it. What does this mean for Pakistan?
Well, it probably means a number of different things. For Pakistan, there is a degree to which there will be anxiety that India, which is, described as its principal enemy, most of Pakistan's military policy is Indo-centric, as described by senior Pakistani officials there. I think they'll be a little bit anxious about the fact that India is getting closer to the United States and that Pakistan is getting squeezed. There's been, in addition to that, obviously there's been the greater criticism of Pakistan as well. And that will actually probably play quite badly there in a number of respects.
Lawrence Korb, what's your take on it? Do you think that India has overtaken Pakistan as Washington's main partner perhaps in the region?
No, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. We have different considerations in our policy toward India and different toward Pakistan. The real challenge is to make sure that one does not undermine the other. Pakistan, I think, is quite right, the professor's quite right, that they will get anxious over this, just as India gets anxious when we, give military and economic aid to Pakistan. But I do think this trip, the president has to assure India that, we're not helping Pakistan to go after India. We're more concerned about Afghanistan. And there are things that we can encourage India to do in Afghanistan that will not get the Pakistanis to be anxious. For example, the Indians could train Afghan security forces, but do it in India rather than going into Afghanistan. They can help build a road from Iran across Afghanistan and through Pakistan that will provide energy to both countries. There are things like that where both sides can gain, and I hope that the president is working on both of those while he's there.
Inderjeet Parmar, how can India and the U.S. come together to fight terrorism, just like we're talking about right now, when the U.S. is a major ally of India's arch-rival, Pakistan?
Well, there it is. That's the big problem. They're riding two tigers at the same time. I mean, the fact that Obama's entourage stayed at the hotel in Mumbai, which was the center of the attack, which has been clearly linked in some circles with Pakistani intelligence, is symbolic. It's symbolic. It sends a message to Pakistan that, we know what is going on and we're not happy with it, and you need to deploy a larger amount of your resources in the direction of fighting those kinds of terrorists. And those terrorists have affected India quite badly over the last several years. So I think that's an important signal to Pakistan. It's a very, very difficult question, whether or not how you fight the Taliban, whether you maintain very large-scale military forces there for a long period of time, the degree to which you try to accommodate that particular those particular groups. We know the history of Afghanistan. We know that no foreign country has been able to so-called pacify or colonialize it adequately. There's nobody who's been able to do it. The Russians couldn't do it. They're trying to be involved more in it now. Before that, the British tried to do it for many, many decades. They failed to do so. The Americans and the British together and many other forces have now spent 10 years almost in Afghanistan and have failed to do so. The way in which you fight so-called terror is to actually look at the political situation and try to deal with it in a manner which is accommodationist and long-term and not short-term and military.
All right. Well, no doubt Pakistan will be closely looking at Obama's trip to India. And another country, in fact, that we've also mentioned, of course, is China. Lawrence Korb, how do you think Beijing is viewing Obama's visit to India?
Well, China does not like the fact that people talk about India as a counterweight or a balance to China. So I think, we have to be, very careful about how we play that. But we have a lot of the same economic problems with India that we have, with China that we have with India. So just because he's not going to China on this visit doesn't mean that that's not a big problem. And I think the president is going to have to, at some point here, make a trip to just China to talk about the issues we have. As you may remember, the relations are not very good right now with China because of our military assistance package to Taiwan. The Chinese refused to let Secretary of Defense Gates come to visit. The Chinese were upset when Secretary Clinton tried to mediate between the Chinese and the Japanese over the rights to the island in the Sea of Japan. So basically, right now they're not good. But on the other hand, because of China's actions in that part of the world, a lot of the countries are asking the United States to make sure that they stay involved militarily, countries particularly in Southeast Asia.
So then you don't think that China was deliberately excluded then from this Asian tour that Obama is embarking on, Lawrence?
No, I don't think it was. I think you got to make China a visit by itself. The problem was that last spring, after we gave the aid package to Taiwan, China wouldn't even let the Secretary of Defense come. So it was pretty hard then for the president to say he wanted to make a visit. But I think by early next year, that situation will have calmed down, and I think that the Chinese would be receptive to a visit, particularly since they're getting a new leader themselves.
All right, Indrajit Parmar, what's your take on China? Is this perhaps was it a move by Obama to interrupt China's growing influence, perhaps?
I don't know about that. I think it's interesting. The group of countries that he's visiting are broadly democratic countries, and I think there's a kind of message in that America is more comfortable when dealing with those kind of countries. But pragmatically, China cannot be ignored. China may well be very anxious that there's a kind of encirclement policy going on, to which they are, not party. That there are a broad range of democratic countries which the United States is visiting now. But on the other hand, China also knows that it is instrumental in American recovery too. There are clearly things that the United States has to do internally, but there are also very large gains to be made from the Chinese market. So I think that China will be anxious about this. But on the other hand, China needs the United States. Nobody can ignore the size of that market. And China, which is a largely export-led economy, needs the American market as much as the Americans may need the Chinese market.
All right. Well, some are saying that the most important issue is that the U.S. does need a strong ally over in Asia to counterbalance the Chinese dominance. If I can just press you on that a little bit, Indrajit Parmar, do you agree or not?
Well, of course, India is much more of, as they say, a natural ally of the United States. You looked earlier on at the fact that the Clinton administration, it was during the Clinton administration where the turning point in US-Indian relations occurred. That's very clear. The end of the Cold War, the elimination of the Soviet Union from world politics, a unipolar, so-called unipolar moment, means now that the United States shifts its entire rationale for global influence and power, and democratic enlargement and democratic engagement is a key part of it. And India, being one of the largest politically democratic countries, is going to become more and more important. Allied with its economic growth, it becomes very significant for the United States. So now it is going to be, in a way, that kind of democratic counterbalance. So the point I'm trying to make, in the group of countries that Obama has chosen to visit on this particular occasion, it is a kind of relatively democratic group of countries which will give a great deal of sort of succor to the Chinese, who may kind of think that there's a degree to which an encirclement policy is being followed.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's entirely the idea, but certainly there's a degree of containment which may well be underlying some of this particular visit.
All right, Indrajit Parmar, Professor of Politics from Manchester, and Lawrence Korb, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense. Thank you very much both for your time here on Inside Story. And we thank our viewers, of course, for watching. We welcome your comments and your suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.